Hello, Julie here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be creating 3 masculine cards. My husband's birthday is in April and I wanted to make a card for him, so I thought I'd do a set of 3. I was also recently reminded about using alfoil or foil sheets with embossing folders, so I thought I would do that in this set. I've used it on 2 of the 3 cards. For the first card I'm going to use these Kaisercraft brown cards, and I'm going to use the Kaisercraft Garage Days paper pad for all 3. I've chosen some papers for my first card, I don't think I use them all in the end, and I have already embossed some of the alfoil using an assortment of embossing folders. There's a music notes one, a dates or postage stamps, zigzags, just a bit of a messy pattern, and dots. I don't end up using all of them, I only use 2 pieces. I selected the piece of alfoil that I wanted to use and I trimmed it down to 4 3/4 inches by 4 3/4 inches. Next I took one of the pattern papers and I trimmed that down to 3 inches by 4.5 inches. Next I cut a piece of pattern paper that was 3 inches by 4 inches. Then I cut a piece of pattern that is 5 inches by 5 inches to be the base of my layers. The final pattern paper for this card, I cut a 3 1/4 inch strip, a 3/4 inch strip. Then I cut that into 1 1/4 inch pieces. I'm going to use as little fish tails. So this is going to be the base for my card. I'm going to cut some fish tails in my papers now. This bigger piece, I'm going to measure up 3/4 of an inch from the middle and cut that out. And the 3 smaller pieces up the side in the denim paper, I'm going to measure up 1/4 of an inch and cut each of those so they have a fishtail. It was at this stage that I decided that I wanted to matte everything on black because I didn't like the way they looked when they were just layered on top of each other. I wanted something to define them a little more, so I went ahead and cut mattes for each of those pieces of pattern paper that I had already cut. I only made them 1/8 of an inch larger than the pattern paper because I only wanted a very fine border around each piece. So I cut one piece that was 5 1/8 by 5 1/8, another that was 4 7/8 by 4 7/8, one piece that was 3 1/8 by 4 5/8, one that was 3 1/8 by 4 1/4, one that was 2 1/8 by 1 5/8, and one that was 1 3/8 by 1 7/8. So those last 2 were actually for to mount the greeting, but we'll get to that later. For my greeting I'm going to use this happy birthday stamp. It is an Aussie made stamp by Annalie Crafts in South Australia. I've had it for a very long time, so you probably can't get it now, but anyway, I stamped that onto a piece of cream cardstock, which I will then trim down to 1 3/4 inches by 1 1/4 inches. As you can see, I use my StazOn jet black ink. To embellish this piece of card, I'm going to add 2 brads. I'm going to poke a hole with my pokey tool into an old stubby holder. Now it's time to attach all of my layers to my card base. I use double-sided tape for this. I just use 4 strips, 1 in each corner, and layer them so they're central on top of each other. This section here will go over more towards the left. The pennant piece will be closer to the right hand side so that the little fishtail pieces that poke out don't go past the edge of the grey pattern paper. I wanted to lift my greeting up from the card, so I'm using some foam tape behind it. I use 2 pieces so that the actual greeting doesn't sink down in the middle. When I came to actually attach it to the card, I decided it needed something to give it a bit more of a lift, so I cut a piece of the aluminium foil and matted that on another piece of black, and then used that to add my greeting to my card. Because the inside of my card was dark brown and would be very hard to write on, I decided to trim down some of the pattern papers that were left over and attach them to the inside of the card so that I've got a nice light area to write on when I'm ready to give this card to somebody. So that completes our first card for today. I decided to go with white card bases for my next 2 cards, so I cut a sheet of white cardstock 10.5 inches by 5.25 inches, and I scored each one of those pieces down the middle at 5.25 inches. I then used my bone folder to score it nice and firmly. So this next card is the one that I actually made for my husband. I chose my pattern papers and I started trimming them to size. The yellow one is 5 inches by 5 inches. The blue with the spot is 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. The alfoil, embossed alfoil piece is 4 3/8 by 4 3/8. And the orange strip that goes down the side is 2 inches by 5 inches. I wanted a little decorative strip to go down the side of the orange paper, so I went back to the paper pad, found one and trimmed it to size. Now I'm going to use my Prima distressing tool to distress the edges of all of the papers except for the alfoil and the decorative strip that I took from the paper pad. Once I've finished distressing the edges, I use a black Versacolour ink pad to ink all of the edges. Now that all my layers are prepared, I'm going to use a mixture of double-sided tape and glue to attach all of the papers on top of the card. I have these 2 EK Success heart punches. They're the same shape but different sizes, so I use those punches to create 2 hearts out of the blue spotty paper. Then I use my black ink to ink around the edge of them. I went through the paper pad and selected a few more embellishments for the card, and I distressed the edge of the embellishments with my distressing tool and then inked the edges before attaching them to the card. I used glue to attach the 2 rectangular pieces and foam tape to attach the circle and the hearts to the front of the card. Time now to create my sentiment. I'm using a stamp that I've had for a very long time. I'm not sure what brand it is. It's got CC231 on it. It says happy birthday. I'm stamping that onto a piece of white cardstock, and then I am trimming it down to the size I want, which is 1 3/4 inches by 1 1/8 inches. I then mount my greeting on a piece of the blue spot card that I've used on the card base already, and I've cut the hearts out of, and I distress and ink the edges of both the mat and the greeting. Once this is done, I use glue to attach one on top of the other. The greeting is then attached to the card using glue, and that completes this card. So this is the card my husband got. Our next card uses a white base once again. I chose two pattern papers from the pad, one of which had some bronze foiling on it, so it was very shiny. And from the denim coloured paper, I cut 3 pieces. One is 5 1/8 inches square. The second piece is 2 3/4 by 5 1/8, and the third piece is 1 3/8 by 1 7/8. The 1 3/8 by 1 7/8 will be used to mount my greeting. From the foiled card, I cut a piece 4 7/8 by 4 7/8 and a piece 2 1/2 by 5 1/8. Then I had a look through my pad and looked for a couple of pieces that I could use to embellish the card. I chose 2 tags, and I also chose 2 pieces of paper that I cut out from a foiled piece of paper from the pad. I used my crocodile to add a bronze eyelet to each of the tags, and then I threaded some white crochet cotton through those eyelets to complete the tags. Now I'm going to ink the edges of all of the papers and use double-sided tape to attach the layers on top of each other and then to the card base itself. I use foam tape to attach the squares on top of the tags. This gives me a bit of extra height. I use the Annalie Crafts Happy Birthday stamp once again to make my greeting. So I stamped that onto a piece of white cardstock, which I trimmed down to 1 1/8 inches by 1 5/8 inches. I use Stays On black ink to stamp my greeting. I used the piece of denim paper that I had cut to 1 3/8 by 1 7/8 to mat my greeting on. I ink around the edge of both of these pieces of paper and then use my glue to attach one on top of the other. The greeting assembly is then attached to the card front using foam tape. That completes our last card for today, so that's 3 masculine cards in this video. I hope you've enjoyed watching my video, and if you have, I'd love it if you would become a subscriber if you're not already. If you click the bell next to the subscribe button, you'll be notified each time I upload a new video. I try to do that about every week, once a week, and yes, thank you for joining me, and I look forward to joining with you when I create my next video. Thank you.